We've looked at statistics of why voting matters, particularly to do with ages. So younger people we know tend not to vote as much as elder people, but then there's the issue with who they're voting for and what impact it's going to have. So we've said if you're younger, the changes that are made by a political party are going to have more of an impact on you than older people. However, it's older people who go out en masse to vote. So why should we vote then? That's what this lesson is going to concentrate on. Think about who can vote in Great Britain today. There's certain groups that can't. Why? So prisoners, for example, they can't vote. Why can't they vote? And should they be able to? Should everyone vote who can? So if you are able to vote, if you're not in a group that can't, should you be made to vote? Should it be compulsory? What could be the arguments for and against that? So if you have a think, there are groups in this country who weren't allowed to vote previously. The suffragettes represented women who couldn't vote, and then the Chartists were a group of working class men because they didn't used to be able to vote. So if you think back to the Industrial Revolution, when it was literally workers, the vast amount of people were workers in the factories compared to the bosses, it would really only be the bosses who were allowed to vote, because to be able to vote you had to own your own home, and the vast amount of people didn't, they rented. So of course that caused issues with power and not changing conditions. So in the 2010 elections, only 65% of people voted. The lowest amount of people are in the 18 to 24-year-olds, and even in the 2019 general election, still only 56% of they did. So why? Think about the difference it can make. We've already said 1% more of 18 to 24-year-olds voting in the Brexit referendum, the result would have been different. So why aren't people voting? These are what you'll be able to do in this lesson. Okay, so our key words, can you make sure you're able to spell these, please? We know what democracy is. We know a constituency is your local voting area where an MP represents you. Voter apathy means that you're apathetic towards voting. You just don't care. You can't be bothered. And an election is obviously how we do our vote. So we know already that the UK is split up into 650 constituencies, which is just a geographical area that one MP represents. When it's a general election, you go out and you vote for the person who you want to be your local MP. They usually represent a political party. The person in that area that gets the most votes becomes the MP, or they have a seat in the House of Commons. The party that has got the most MPs usually is the party that gains power and wins the election. To win an election, you need at least half of the seats or half of the MPs. So with 650 MPs up for grabs, they need 325. If you've got the textbooks, you can have a look at those. The next thing you need to do is you need to match up the answer with the question. So this is all going back over the democratic process. So if you have a look then, we have got the questions are in the greeny yellowy boxes, the answers are the writing next to them, but they are in the wrong order. So if you press pause on the video and have a go at matching them up. And the answers are: a general election is a UK-wide vote where people vote for who they would like to represent them in the House of Commons. They happen every 4 to 5 years. There's no qualifications to be an MP, you've got to be 21 or over. They're usually part of a political party, but you can be an independent candidate. The UK's got 650 constituencies. Candidates from different parties compete to be the MP there, and people who live in that constituency, who are called the constituents, vote for the candidate they want to represent them. And the candidate with the most votes in each constituency becomes the MP. That's called first past the post. And how is the government formed? The party with the most candidates wins the election. Their leader of that party is the Prime Minister, and they choose ministers to form the government. Okay, so why vote then? There's going to be 4 imaginary characters on the next slide who don't want to vote. What you have got to do is think about what are their main reasons why and how we could persuade them to vote. So if we have a look, our 4 characters then, we've got John, he's a pensioner, he's 87. He says he's not going to vote because it's too hard for him to get out of the house. He's old now and he doesn't see how politics will affect him. We've got Jo, who's a care worker, she's 38. She says she's not voting in the next election because she doesn't think the parties are different enough to be able to choose. Samir's a student who's 18. He says, I've never voted before and I think I might not vote in this election. It's too confusing and I wouldn't know who to pick. And then Sarah's a police officer who's 51. She says, I'm not going to vote in the next election. They keep making promises about fighting crime, but I don't see any changes. So what we are going to do is we are going to do a 4-mark question based on this, using that as our source. So our 4-mark question would be explain 2 reasons why some people don't vote. You need to go back through the video, look at the 2 characters, any 2 of the characters, and explain why that. You need to explain why 2 of those characters don't vote, and you've also got to say how you could encourage them to vote. So, John, for example, he's a pensioner. He says he can't get out to vote and he doesn't see how it affects him. Well, you could argue, how about using a postal vote? You don't have to leave the house. That way you can apply for a postal vote and then you could do it that way. And of course it affects him. What about care for the elderly? What about changes to the NHS? So you can do it like that, go through each of the people and come up with a reason as to why they don't vote and how you could convince them to. Then you'll be able to argue different reasons why people don't vote and why people should vote. That's the most important thing. Then what I want you to think about is ways that we could improve voter engagement. Some of the ways that we could do that, we could look at things like making elections on Saturdays or Sundays. At the moment, they're usually held on Thursdays, which is midweek. If you've been to work all day, you might be too tired to go out and go to your local polling station. So we could have weekend voting. I think it's France where they do votes on Sundays and they do get a higher turnout. How about making voting compulsory? That could be an argument. So, for example, in Australia, if you don't vote, you actually get fined. But then think about the whole democracy of that. Is it even democratic to make people vote? Surely there should be a case for choosing not to vote. You could also think about internet voting. That could be the way forward. However, there's massive problems there with fraud and maybe people voting twice. They'd really have to work on a sustainable, safe website to be able to do that. But they are definitely ways of improving voter engagement. Perhaps if they lowered voting down to 16, you have to learn this stuff in school, so maybe kids would be more willing to go out and vote and continue that voting behaviour. So weekend voting, compulsory voting, more places, make them so they're more local, but then think of issues with all of them as well.